Daniel Mercer, you have betrayed this institution. You have no right to claim credit for this masterpiece.
They're gone. The chairman's voice echoed through the marble atrium before I even reached the stage. Every original authentication record connected to the Horizon collection has disappeared. 100 guests turned at once. Collectors, reporters, investors, government cultural officials. The grand reopening of the Ashcroft Museum had been transformed into chaos in less than 30 seconds. Then every eye landed on me. As expected, Lydia Chen said softly, crossing her arms. He's pretending to be surprised. The accusation spread through the room faster than fire. He was the chief conservator. He controlled the archive. If anyone could make the records disappear, it was him. I stood at the edge of the exhibition hall, still wearing the white gloves I'd forgotten to remove after preparing the gallery that morning. No one asked me a question. They had already decided. Chairman Victor Hale stepped toward the microphone, his silver hair immaculate despite the panic surrounding him. Daniel Mercer, he announced, until this matter is investigated, you are relieved of all responsibilities. Not suspended, not questioned, relieved. Such polite words for public execution. Applause didn't follow. Silence did. The kind that hurt more. I looked across the room toward the centerpiece of the exhibition. A painting nearly 6 feet tall. The Dawn Beyond Winter. The masterpiece I had spent 12 years restoring. My life's work. My fingerprints covered every microscopic layer beneath its varnish. My research had identified every pigment, every hidden sketch, every repaired crack. I had rescued it from mold, flood damage, careless handling, and political neglect. Tonight, my name appeared nowhere beside it. Instead, a gold plaque read, restored by senior curator Adrian Vale, a young man barely 30, the chairman's favorite protege. He smiled modestly as cameras flashed around him. He even lowered his eyes, pretending embarrassment. I almost admired the performance. Almost. Lydia walked closer until only a few feet separated us. You could apologize, she whispered. For what? For making this difficult. I laughed. Not loudly. Just enough for her expression to tighten. 12 years, I said quietly. You still think I'm the difficult one? She didn't answer. Because she knew. She had watched every late night. Every emergency repair. Every grant proposal. Every sleepless month before international inspections. She also watched when the board removed my name from publication after publication. She never objected. Not once. Victor cleared his throat. We will recover from this unfortunate situation. Another lie. Because he believed the records were missing. They weren't. I knew exactly where every original authentication certificate was. Exactly where every infrared scan rested. Exactly where every conservation diary waited. Exactly where every expert signature had been secured. Safe. Beyond the reach of everyone in this room. Including me. Because 3 weeks earlier, I had legally transferred every original document into the custody of the National Cultural Integrity Office. Signed. Verified. Witnessed. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I saw what they were becoming. A museum without historians. Only politicians. Only investors. Only ambitious young stars hungry for headlines. The originals were never meant to stay inside a building ruled by vanity. No one here knew that. Not even Adrian. He approached me now with careful steps. His voice trembled. I didn't ask for this. I studied him. He looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath his eyes. Hands shaking. Too young to carry a lie this large. Didn't you? I asked. They said. I know what they said. They promised I'd learn from you. They promised many things. His lips parted. I tried talking to the chairman. When they replaced your name. So after it happened. He looked away. That answered enough. A security officer approached. Mr. Mercer. He avoided eye contact. We'll need your access badge. I unclipped it immediately. The familiar weight left my palm. 23 years inside these walls. Reduced to a plastic card sliding across polished wood. Lydia frowned. You aren't going to argue? No. No defense. No. Victor watched carefully. Waiting. Expecting outrage. Expecting me to accuse him. Instead, I removed my white gloves. Folded them neatly. Placed them beside the badge. Then I walked toward the exit. Someone shouted behind me. Running already? Another voice laughed. Guilty people always do. None of them stopped me. None noticed the tiny smile that crossed my face as I reached the museum doors. Outside, rain had begun to fall. Cold, steady. I stood beneath the stone archway for several seconds. Not because I couldn't leave, because I knew what was about to happen inside. Exactly 6 minutes later, every screen in the exhibition hall would display a government notification. The National Cultural Integrity Office never delayed scheduled announcements. And today they were releasing a nationwide audit notice, including one sentence the museum board had never expected to read. Original authentication records have been voluntarily transferred into independent federal protection by Chief Conservator Daniel Mercer, pending institutional review. I looked up at the gray sky, then walked away before anyone inside could call my name. Half an hour later, my phone began vibrating. Once, twice, 10 times, 50. Victor, Lydia, Adrian, board members, unknown numbers. I ignored every call. Instead, I entered a small cafe across from the river. The owner recognized me. Long day. You could say that. He poured coffee without asking. You look strangely peaceful. I finally stopped carrying something that wasn't mine anymore. The television above the counter interrupted regular programming. A news anchor appeared. Breaking news. Government audit initiated at Ashcroft Museum. The cafe fell silent. Everyone watched. So the records weren't stolen. No. They were removed legally? Looks like it. What does that mean? The anchor continued. Officials confirmed that documentation was transferred weeks before today's exhibition following concerns regarding institutional governance. Weeks. Not today. Weeks. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. The first stone had fallen. The avalanche had only begun. By evening, every major news outlet had the same photograph on its front page. Not of the masterpiece. Not of Chairman Victor Hale. Mine. Captured while leaving the museum with my badge in one hand and my gloves in the other. The headline beneath it read, "The man who walked away before the museum fell." I almost smiled. Journalists loved symbolism. Reality was usually quieter. My apartment overlooked an old railway bridge where freight trains passed after sunset. The vibrations had annoyed me when I first moved in years ago. Tonight they felt oddly comforting. Solid. Predictable. Unlike people. My mobile buzzed again. This time it wasn't the museum. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen in nearly 4 years. Professor Eleanor Brooks. I answered. "You've been busy. I've been unemployed for exactly 9 hours." She laughed softly. "That may not last. You've seen the news." "I've seen far more than the news." There was a pause. "They've started opening the files." I leaned against the window. So soon. They expected irregular accounting. What did they find? They're asking how restoration budgets doubled while conservation reports became shorter. I closed my eyes. Exactly as I had predicted. Because fraud never traveled alone. It always invited friends. "You warned them," Eleanor continued. "Several times. They called me resistant to innovation. They called you old-fashioned. I was 46. They needed a villain." Her words lingered. Not because they hurt. Because they were true. Every institution eventually reached a moment where experience became inconvenient. Adrian represented youth. Marketing. Celebrity interviews. Social media. He restored paintings with camera crews watching. I restored them alone after midnight. Guess which one attracted donors? Daniel. I'm listening. The Integrity Office wants you available. I expected that. They also want to know why you transferred everything instead of exposing the board immediately. I looked toward the bridge again. A freight train rolled slowly across it. I hoped they'd stop. Silence answered me. I really did. I know. I thought if the originals disappeared from their reach, they'd ask why. They didn't. No. They celebrated. Eleanor sighed. I always wondered how much disappointment one person could survive. I suppose we're about to find out. Another call interrupted us. Victor. Again. I declined it. Then another. Lydia. Declined. Then Adrian. I stared at his name before letting it ring out. I'm not ready, I murmured. You don't owe anyone tonight. I know. After ending the call, I opened an old wooden cabinet. Inside rested a stack of conservation journals. 23 notebooks. Every restoration I'd ever supervised. Not official copies. Personal observations. Tiny sketches. Failed techniques. Successful experiments. Coffee stains. Pressed leaves collected from restoration sites. A lifetime written in ink. The museum had one in my hands. Not my mind. That had always been their mistake. A loud knock echoed through the apartment. Not frantic. Measured. When I opened the door, Adrian stood there, soaked by rain. His expensive suit looked ruined. He held no umbrella. You shouldn't have come. I didn't know where else to go. I waited. He remained standing. Water dripped onto the hallway floor. They're saying I forged restoration reports. Did you? No. They're saying I approve techniques I don't understand. Did you? His shoulders collapsed. I signed them. Without reading. I trusted the board. There it was. Not malice. Weakness. Sometimes more destructive. They told me everything had already been reviewed. And you believed them. I wanted. His voice cracked. I wanted to deserve the opportunity. I stepped aside. Come in. He hesitated. You aren't angry? I've had years to finish being angry. He entered quietly. The apartment was simple. Books. Plants. Paint samples. No awards displayed. No framed certificates. He noticed. Where are your medals? In storage. Why? They reminded me of people instead of work. We sat opposite each other. Neither of us touched the tea I'd prepared. Finally, he whispered. They never taught me. I know. They just put my name everywhere. I know. They said history belonged to whoever people remembered. I looked directly at him. No. It belongs to whoever protected it. His eyes filled. They're going to destroy me. No. They're going to ask questions. Isn't that the same thing? Only if you keep lying. He stared at the floor. Minutes passed. Then he reached into his leather bag. One folder. Thin. Shaking hands pushed it across the table. I copied emails. I didn't touch it. I was afraid. So you kept evidence. I didn't know why. You knew? He nodded slowly. I think I always knew. Outside, another train crossed the bridge. The room trembled for only a second. Enough to remind me that foundations mattered more than appearances. My phone rang once more. This time the caller ID displayed an unfamiliar government number. I answered. This is Daniel Mercer. A calm female voice replied. Mr. Mercer, this is Investigator Sophia Grant from the National Cultural Integrity Office. I glanced at the unopened folder between Adrian and me. We've just received an anonymous package, she said. It appears someone inside Ashcroft Museum has decided to cooperate. Adrian lowered his head. His fingers tightened around the empty teacup. Investigator Grant continued. I believe the collapse of this case has only just begun. The line remained silent for a heartbeat. Then she added one sentence that changed everything. Mr. Mercer, your masterpiece may not be the only work they stole. The silence after Investigator Grant's final sentence felt heavier than any accusation I had endured that morning. My masterpiece may not be the only work they stole. I looked at Adrian. He refused to meet my eyes. You knew something else, I said. His breathing became uneven. I suspected. Suspecting isn't the same as knowing. No. Then tell me what made you suspicious. His fingers remained wrapped around the untouched teacup. The chairman started moving old conservation files 6 months ago. Where? A private archive. The museum has no private archive. I know. You asked? They told me board-level projects weren't my concern. I nodded slowly. Exactly as Victor always operated. Divide information. Control the narrative. Reward obedience. Punish curiosity. The perfect system, until someone stopped protecting it. The next morning rain still covered the city. The National Cultural Integrity Office occupied a gray government building that looked more like a courthouse than an archive. No banners. No expensive sculptures. Only concrete and order. Investigator Sophia Grant greeted me personally. She looked younger than I expected, perhaps late 30s, dressed in a navy suit with no jewelry except a simple watch. You came. You sounded convincing. I try. Her office walls were filled with shelves instead of decorations. Every shelf held evidence boxes. Every box represented someone who believed they would never be caught. She placed a thick folder before me. Ashcroft Museum. It was already overflowing. 1 day's investigation? She smiled faintly. 1 day's cooperation. I understood immediately. Employees were talking. Not because they had suddenly discovered morality. Because power had shifted. Fear always changed direction first. Grant opened the folder. The emails Mr. Adrian Vale provided match financial records. She turned another page. So do internal payment approvals. Another. And these. Photographs. Storage rooms. Wooden crates. Unregistered artwork. I recognized several paintings instantly. They were never declared. No, they belonged to regional museums. Yes. I looked up. They've been collecting pieces privately. Grant folded her hands. We believe Chairman Hale intended to create a donor-exclusive investment collection. I stared at the photographs. Museums existed to preserve history. Victor had treated history like stock market assets. Were they sold? Not yet. So they plan to. We think so. She paused before adding. But something concerns me more. She slid forward another document. A list of conservation staff. 32 names. Mine at the top. Then, crossed out. One after another. Restructuring proposal? Grant nodded. The board intended to dismiss nearly every senior conservator and replace them with influencers. The word sounded ridiculous. Yet there it was. Printed. Official. Digital heritage ambassadors. I almost laughed. 20 years of scientific conservation. Replaced by live streams. Back at the museum, panic had begun replacing confidence. Television vans blocked the entrance. Government seals covered archive doors. Employees stood outside smoking despite the rain. Lydia saw me first. Her umbrella nearly slipped from her hand. You actually came back. I was invited. Not by us. No. She swallowed. Daniel, I don't work here anymore. I know. I'd prefer you remembered that. For the first time since I had met her 15 years ago, she looked genuinely uncertain. I need to explain. You had years. It wasn't that simple. It rarely is. She stepped closer. I argued for you. When? Behind closed doors. I looked at her carefully. I don't doubt you. Hope briefly appeared in her eyes. Then I continued. You argued quietly. Her shoulders stiffened. That changes nothing. She had no answer. Because deep inside, she already knew. Silence sometimes protected victims. Sometimes it protected cowards. The difference mattered. Inside the main hall, workers carefully removed paintings from display. Government officers documented every movement. Nobody barked orders anymore. Nobody rushed. Truth preferred patience. Victor Hale stood surrounded by lawyers. His immaculate confidence from yesterday had disappeared. He spotted me immediately. You. One word. Filled with disbelief. You've caused enough damage. I didn't. You handed over confidential material. I handed public heritage to legal protection. It belonged to the museum. No. It belonged to history. Several investigators nearby looked toward us. Victor lowered his voice. You've ruined everything. I studied him. His tie was crooked. His eyes bloodshot. He had probably not slept. For years I imagined this moment. I expected satisfaction. Instead, I felt tired. You ruined it, I replied calmly. I simply stopped stopping you. His face reddened. You think you're noble? No. You think people will remember you? I don't control memory. You wanted this. No. I wanted the museum. That answer seemed to hurt him more than any accusation. Because it was true. I had never wanted his chair. His influence. His title. Only the work. Nothing more. An investigator interrupted. Chairman Hale, we'll require access to your personal office. My lawyers. Already agreed. Victor looked around. Nobody stepped forward. Not one board member. Not one executive. The men who applauded him yesterday now stared at the floor. Power had become contagious. So had abandonment. As officers entered Victor's office, one elderly janitor approached me quietly. His name was Samuel. He had worked here longer than I had. He removed his cap respectfully. Mr. Mercer, you don't have to call me that anymore. I always will. His weathered hands trembled slightly. I kept something. For me? No. For the museum. He reached into an old canvas bag. A brass key. Small. Worn smooth by decades. I never told them about the west basement. I frowned. The old conservation vault. Samuel nodded. They thought it was sealed forever. It should be empty. He looked toward Victor's office before whispering. It isn't. The west basement had not appeared on museum maps for nearly 20 years. Most employees believed it had been demolished during renovation. They were wrong. Samuel led investigator Grant and me through a forgotten service corridor hidden behind movable shelving. Dust coated the walls. The air smelled of old stone and drying timber. No one's been here? Grant asked. Samuel shook his head. Not officially. He stopped before a rusted steel door. The brass key slid into the lock with surprising ease. One slow turn. A loud click echoed through the corridor. The heavy door opened inward. Darkness greeted us. Grant switched on a torch. The beam swept across shelves. Old restoration equipment. Wooden cabinets. Then stopped. Canvas after canvas. Covered with protective cloth. My heartbeat slowed. Not faster. Slower. Because I recognized the arrangement. This had been my first conservation workshop. 21 years ago. I stepped inside carefully. Every footstep stirred dust untouched for years. Grant lifted one cloth. A landscape emerged. Original. And signed. Forgotten. Then another. 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 Dozens. Samuel whispered. They told everyone these were beyond saving. I examined the nearest painting. No. My voice remained calm. They never intended to restore them. Grant looked at me. They hid them. No. Worse. I pointed toward the inventory numbers. They erased them. She immediately understood. Without records, art legally ceased to exist. No paperwork. No responsibility. No public scrutiny. The perfect theft. One cabinet remained locked. Grant motioned toward an officer. He forced it open. Inside lay leather-bound conservation journals. Not mine. Older. Much older. Professor Leonard Huxley's handwriting. The greatest conservator the museum had ever employed. He had died 12 years earlier. Everyone believed his final research had been lost in a flood. I opened the first journal. The pages were perfectly preserved. No flood. Grant murmured. No. They lied. Samuel nodded sadly. Professor Huxley cried that day. I froze. What? He said they were taking history away. My throat tightened. I thought he meant retirement. Samuel looked at the journals. I don't think he did. News of the discovery spread through the building within minutes. Whispers replaced conversation. Employees gathered outside the basement entrance. Nobody dared enter. Adrian arrived breathless. I heard. He stopped after seeing the shelves. Oh. His face lost all color. They never showed me this. They weren't supposed to. He walked slowly among the hidden paintings. I thought the museum owned everything. It owned responsibility, not possession. He nodded silently. For the first time, he looked less like a celebrated curator and more like a student standing before history. Grant received a phone call. She listened quietly, then lowered the device. Mr. Mercer. Yes. We've completed the preliminary audit of the chairman's office. And she hesitated. Your employment file wasn't the only one altered. I waited. There are 12 former conservators listed as having resigned voluntarily. I remember them. They never resigned. The corridor suddenly felt colder. What happened? Grant held my gaze. They were dismissed after refusing to approve false authentication reports. I closed Professor Huxley's journal carefully, one page at a time. The leather cover felt unexpectedly warm in my hands. For years, I believed I had simply outlasted everyone else. Now I understood. I hadn't survived because I was stronger. I survived because I had remained useful. The moment I refused to become useful, they had erased me too. Exactly as they erased the paintings. Exactly as they erased the journals. Exactly as they tried to erase the truth. Behind us, voices echoed down the corridor. Lawyers. Reporters. Officials. The hidden vault would no longer remain hidden. Neither would the past. As camera flashes began reflecting off the old varnished canvases, Investigator Grant leaned toward me and spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. Mr. Mercer. Yes. We've identified the chairman's final transaction. I looked at her. It wasn't a painting. What was it? She handed me a photocopy of a confidential contract. The signature at the bottom belonged to Victor Hale. The name at the top belonged to me. A resignation agreement I had never signed. Dated 3 months before my public dismissal. Someone had planned my disappearance long before they stole my masterpiece. The forged resignation agreement lay between us like a confession no one had intended me to read. My signature looked convincing. The curve of the D, the narrow stroke through the M. Even the pressure marks beneath the ink had been imitated with unsettling precision. Only one detail betrayed the fraud. The date. 3 months earlier, I had been in Florence attending an international conservation symposium. I had never set foot inside the museum that week. Grant studied my expression. You noticed something. The date. She glanced at it again. You weren't here. No. She immediately turned to one of her investigators. Confirm his travel records. The officer hurried away. Adrian looked from the contract to me. They planned to replace you before the exhibition. They planned to erase me. There was a difference. Replacing someone acknowledged their existence. Erasing them suggested they had never mattered. The basement vault had become a restricted crime scene by sunset. Government photographers documented every hidden painting, every journal, every inventory stamp that had mysteriously vanished from official records. I remained quietly in the corner, watching, not directing, not interfering. Years ago, I would have organized the cataloging myself. Tonight, I folded my hands behind my back. Someone else carried the burden now. An investigator approached Grant carrying another evidence box. We found these inside Chairman Hale's private cabinet. She opened it. Award plaques, certificates, international recognition. Every one displayed Adrian's name. He frowned. I've never seen these. Grant picked up the first plaque. Outstanding Restoration Leadership. She looked at Adrian. You never attended this conference. No. The second, European Conservation Medal. I wasn't invited. The third, Lifetime Contribution to Heritage. Adrian actually laughed. A bitter, exhausted sound. I'm 30. Even Grant couldn't suppress a faint smile. Victor's ambition had become absurd. He had manufactured an entire career for his favorite protege before the young man had earned one. Adrian lowered himself onto an old wooden crate. I thought I was climbing. He stared at the false awards. I was being carried. No, I said quietly. You were being displayed. He looked at me. Like a painting? Like a product. His shoulders sank. Outside, the media frenzy intensified. Television presenters stood beneath museum banners that now looked strangely hollow. Microphones searched for outrage, scandal, emotion. Several reporters noticed me leaving through a side entrance. Mr. Mercer, did you steal the documents? No. Did you intentionally expose the museum? No. Do you want Chairman Hale arrested? I stopped walking. Rain drifted gently across the pavement. People waited for anger. Instead, I answered calmly. I want the museum to survive. The reporters exchanged puzzled looks. One pressed further. Even after what they did to you. I worked there for 23 years. I looked back at the old stone building. My loyalty was never to the board. The interview ended there. No dramatic accusation. No triumphant speech. Only truth. Sometimes truth disappointed television. Victor Hale was escorted from the building shortly before midnight. Not in handcuffs. Not yet. But under official supervision. His lawyers surrounded him like collapsing walls. When he saw me standing beneath the museum steps, he dismissed them with a gesture. I need a word. Grant glanced at me. I'll be nearby. Victor approached slowly. For the first time since we had met 2 decades earlier. He looked old. Not physically. Spiritually. I underestimated you. You underestimated history. He ignored the correction. You could have warned me. I did. When every report you refused to read. His jaw tightened. You wanted change. I wanted preservation. The museum needed investment. It needed integrity. He laughed bitterly. Integrity doesn't attract donors. No, it attracts trust. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked the question I had expected. When did you decide to betray me? I almost answered immediately. Then I realized something. He truly believed it. In his mind, protecting the museum instead of protecting him was betrayal. I never betrayed you. He frowned. I simply stopped protecting your lies. Those words landed harder than any accusation, because they left him nowhere to hide. The following morning, confirmation arrived. Grant entered the temporary investigation office carrying several printed documents. Mr. Mercer. She placed them before me. Immigration records. Florence. Conference attendance. Hotel registration. Airport surveillance. Every document proved I had been abroad on the date my supposed resignation had been signed. She nodded. The forgery charge is now official. Adrian looked relieved. So that's it. Grant shook her head. No. She produced another folder. We questioned the museum's former administrative assistant. What did she say? Grant opened the transcript. Chairman Hale didn't forge the signature. Silence settled across the room. He hired someone. Hours later, investigators located the forger. His name was Marcus Doyle, a retired calligrapher who had quietly earned money reproducing historical handwriting for film studios. He had believed he was creating a museum display, not falsifying legal documents. Grant invited me to observe the interview through the one-way glass. Marcus looked devastated. They told me it was commemorative. He rubbed trembling hands together. I never would have. Grant interrupted gently. Who instructed you? He closed his eyes. The museum's legal director. Not Victor. Not Adrian. Someone else. Someone who had remained invisible throughout the scandal. Someone who had signed every employment contract for the last decade. Someone whose name had barely appeared in the newspapers. Elaine Porter. Elaine Porter arrived at the museum just after noon. Unlike Victor, she showed no panic. Her charcoal suit remained perfectly pressed. Her hair immaculate. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to surviving other people's disasters. When investigators informed her she was being questioned, she merely smiled. I've prepared documents you'll find helpful. Grant accepted the thick folder. Elaine folded her hands. I've always believed in transparency. Adrian whispered beside me. I've never seen her nervous. Watch carefully. Grant opened the folder. Inside were copies. Not originals. Contracts missing pages. Financial reports with altered totals. Meeting minutes rewritten after approval. Everything had been curated. Not for truth. For defense. Grant closed the folder without another glance. Do you have the originals? Elaine's smile remained. The museum archives should. They don't. She tilted her head slightly. That's unfortunate. The room grew still. For a brief second, I almost admired her composure. Unlike Victor, Elaine understood that power rarely shouted. It documented, manipulated, edited. She had spent years rewriting reality one page at a time. The investigators searched her office. Nothing. No hidden accounts. No incriminating letters. Everything appeared painfully ordinary. Too ordinary. Grant stood in the center of the office, slowly turning. She's cleaned it. No, I said. She curated it. Grant looked at me. Explain. Elaine never removed evidence. She buried it inside procedure. I walked to the wall where decades of framed legal compliance certificates hung in perfect alignment. One certificate leaned ever so slightly. Only a few millimeters. Enough. I removed it. Behind the frame sat a narrow steel compartment hidden within the wall. Grant's eyes narrowed. Open it. An officer forced the concealed lock. Inside lay several portable hard drives. 3 sealed envelopes. 1 notebook. Grant carefully opened the first envelope. Bank transfer confirmations. Private offshore accounts. The second, insurance policies listing artworks that officially did not exist. The third, employment settlements. Every dismissed conservator. Every confidentiality agreement. Every payment. Silence settled over the room. Grant slowly turned toward Elaine. You forgot one thing. Elaine's calm expression finally cracked. I forgot nothing. You forgot that people hide secrets where they expect to retrieve them. The investigation accelerated. Financial crime officers joined cultural investigators. Tax authorities arrived. Insurance regulators requested immediate access. The scandal was no longer confined to one museum. It reached donors, auction houses, private collectors, international lenders. Victor had built an empire. Elaine had built its paperwork. Together, they had mistaken complexity for invincibility. 3 days later, the museum board convened an emergency public meeting. For the first time in decades, the auditorium was filled not with benefactors, but with employees, conservators, cleaners, archivists, students, people who had quietly carried the institution while executives sought applause. Grant attended only as an observer. Government officials occupied the back row. I chose a seat near the exit. Old habit. The acting board chair cleared his throat. The first matter. His voice shook. Concerns the restoration credit for the dawn beyond winter. No one moved. The previous attribution to Adrian Vale has been determined inaccurate. Adrian lowered his head. He stood, walked to the microphone. I accepted recognition I did not deserve. His voice echoed through the hall. I cannot change that. He looked toward me, but I can stop hiding behind it. He removed the ceremonial curator's pin from his jacket, placed it gently on the table. I resign. No applause followed. Only silence. Not hostile. Respectful. He had finally chosen truth over ambition. The acting chair continued. Based on documentary evidence, the restoration is officially credited to Chief Conservator Daniel Mercer. Dozens of heads turned toward me. I remained seated. An employee began clapping. Then another. Soon the entire auditorium echoed with applause. I did not stand. I did not wave. I simply closed my eyes for a moment. Recognition had arrived years too late. Yet somehow, it no longer belonged to my pride. It belonged to the work itself. As the applause gradually faded, Investigator Grant received a message on her phone. She read it once, then again. Her expression hardened. She walked quietly to my side. "We've recovered the final encrypted drive." What was on it? She held my gaze. "The board wasn't planning to erase only your career." A long pause. "They were preparing to sell the Dawn Beyond Winter overseas under a false provenance." The applause still echoed faintly through the hall. No one else had heard her words. I looked toward the masterpiece hanging beneath the museum lights. For 12 years I believed I had saved the painting. Now I understood the truth. The painting had one final battle left to survive. The applause had barely faded when the museum's emergency lights dimmed for a heartbeat. Nobody noticed. I did. Years spent inside galleries had trained my eyes to catch the smallest change in light. A second later, the generators restored full power. The audience relaxed. I didn't. Investigator Grant was already speaking into her radio. "Seal every loading entrance. No vehicle leaves the property." Her tone had changed. Calm, urgent, professional. "What happened?" I asked. "The encrypted drive." She slipped the phone back into her pocket. "It contains transport schedules." "For what?" She looked toward the Dawn Beyond Winter hanging beneath reinforced glass. "For that." Within minutes, uniformed officers spread throughout the museum. Visitors were politely escorted outside. Board members were instructed to remain inside. Confusion replaced ceremony. The acting chairman stood. "Surely this can wait until tomorrow." Grant didn't even look at him. "No." "Why not?" "Because according to recovered correspondence." She opened a printed email. "The painting was scheduled to leave this building tonight." The room froze. Victor Hale, seated under official supervision, slowly lifted his head. "Impossible." Grant turned toward him. "The transport company has already confirmed receiving payment." He blinked once, then twice. "I canceled that shipment." "You postponed it." She placed another document on the table. Elaine Porter rescheduled it. Victor's face lost what little color remained. For the first time, I believed him. He hadn't known. Elaine had continued the operation without him. A convoy of officers descended into the museum's underground loading bay. Grant motioned for me to remain behind. "You've done enough. I know this building. So do my officers. They don't know it's blind spots." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Stay beside me." The loading corridor smelled of engine oil and damp concrete. Wooden transport crates lined the walls. Most were empty. One wasn't. A customs officer pried open the lid. Inside rested a replica, beautifully crafted, convincing enough to deceive almost anyone. Almost. "The craquelure is wrong," I said quietly. Grant looked at me. "The surface aging." I traced a gloved finger through the air without touching it. It was copied by someone who understood appearance. But not time. The officers exchanged puzzled glances. History couldn't be painted overnight. Time always left fingerprints. A mechanic emerged from behind one of the freight lifts. His hand shot upward before anyone spoke. "I just fix vehicles." Grant approached him. "Who hired you?" "A woman." "Name?" "I don't know." "Description?" He swallowed. "Dark suit. Short black hair." "She paid cash." "Elaine." Her office upstairs was empty. The hidden compartment had already been seized. Her desk remained perfectly organized. One fountain pen rested beside an unfinished letter. Grant read it silently. "What is it?" "A resignation." I frowned. She knew. "No." Grant folded the page. She expected this. There was a difference. Elaine had prepared an escape long before Victor's empire began collapsing. She simply intended to leave before the roof fell. An airport alert was issued. Border authorities notified. Bank accounts frozen. Still, no sign of Elaine. Adrian entered the investigation room, carrying another archive box. "I found this in the marketing department." Inside were promotional brochures for next year's international exhibition. Grant flipped through them, then stopped. "What?" She turned one brochure toward me. The cover displayed the Dawn Beyond Winter. Beneath the image appeared a single sentence. "Private collection courtesy of the Ashcroft Heritage Foundation." I stared at the words. Private collection, not museum collection. Private. Someone had already rewritten ownership. On paper, months in advance. Grant immediately called another investigator. "Find every registration document connected to the Heritage Foundation." By evening, the answer arrived. The foundation existed. Legally. Perfectly registered. Its chairman, Victor Hale. Its executive director, Elaine Porter. Its declared assets, 0. Its insured assets, nearly £200 million. Grant slowly lowered the file. They built a second museum. No. I shook my head. They built a legal shell, so they could transfer everything, without calling it theft. Exactly. History wasn't disappearing. It was changing paperwork. Sometimes the most dangerous crime required nothing more dramatic than a signature. Late that night, I wandered alone through the empty Renaissance gallery. Without visitors, museums breathed differently. Quietly. Patiently. The paintings no longer competed for attention. They simply existed. Footsteps echoed behind me. Samuel. The old janitor carried 2 cups of coffee. I figured you forgot dinner. I forgot time. He smiled gently. You always did. We stood before the dawn beyond winter. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally he asked, do you still love this place? I looked around the silent gallery. The cracked marble. The restored ceilings. The smell of old canvas. I never stopped. Even after everything, I stopped loving the people who controlled it. My reflection shimmered faintly in the protective glass. The museum never betrayed me. Samuel nodded. Only those borrowing its keys. Just before dawn, Investigator Grant's phone rang. She answered immediately. Where? A pause. We're coming. She ended the call and looked at me. Elaine's been found. Not at an airport. Not at a border crossing. Not on a yacht. She had hidden inside an abandoned restoration warehouse 20 miles outside the city. The same warehouse where damaged artworks had once been stored before conservation funding was cut. Irony, I thought, had excellent memory. Police surrounded the building before sunrise. Grant entered first. I remained outside. This wasn't my battle anymore. Through the warehouse windows, I could see only shadows moving between shelves. No shouting. No gunfire. Only quiet voices. After nearly 20 minutes, the doors opened. Elaine walked out between 2 officers. Her posture remained straight. Her expression composed, as if she were attending another board meeting. She noticed me immediately. So, her voice carried no anger. You won. I shook my head. No. Don't pretend. You defeated yourself. She smiled faintly. History remembers winners. No. It remembers survivors. She stopped walking. For years I believed you were naive. And now, I think you were inconvenient. I almost laughed. That was probably the most honest thing she had ever said. During questioning, Elaine finally spoke without carefully prepared scripts. She admitted creating the Heritage Foundation, admitted rewriting employment files, admitted falsifying ownership records. But one confession surprised everyone. I never cared about art. Grant looked up from her notes. Then why build all this? Elaine answered without hesitation. Because people trust museums. Silence filled the room. They never question what hangs on a gallery wall. She looked directly at me. You restored paintings. I restored belief. Her words unsettled me. Not because they were true. Because she understood exactly what she had corrupted. The public inquiry opened 3 weeks later. Every major newspaper covered it. International museums sent observers. Former employees returned to testify. One after another. Archivists. Security guards. Conservators. Administrative assistants. None sought revenge. They simply described what they had witnessed. Truth accumulated slowly, like layers of varnish removed one careful stroke at a time. Victor finally admitted approving unethical financial strategies. Adrian publicly accepted responsibility for remaining silent. Elaine accepted criminal liability for document fraud and asset concealment. No dramatic breakdowns. No theatrical confessions. Only consequences. Exactly as they should be. On the inquiry's final day, the commissioner addressed the packed hearing room. A museum does not exist because it owns objects. His voice echoed through the chamber. It exists because society trusts it to protect them. He turned toward me. Mr. Mercer. I stood. You transferred the original authentication records before any investigation began. Yes. Why? The room fell completely silent. Cameras waited. Pens hovered above notebooks. I answered honestly. Because I realized one day that I could no longer protect the museum from the people leading it. A pause. So I protected history instead. No applause followed. Only stillness. Sometimes silence honored truth better than noise ever could. A month later, the official ruling was published. Every hidden artwork returned to its rightful institution. Every forged ownership record canceled. Every dismissed conservator formally cleared. Every authentic restoration credit corrected. At the bottom of the final report appeared one sentence that mattered more to me than any award. The preservation of the Horizon collection remained possible due to the independent actions of Chief Conservator Daniel Mercer. Nothing more. Nothing less. I folded the report carefully. Outside my office window, morning sunlight reached the museum courtyard once again. The scandal was over. The truth had finally been recorded. And for the first time in many years, history belonged to itself again. 6 months later, I unlocked a door that had never belonged to me. There was no marble lobby, no donor wall engraved with gilded names, no cameras waiting outside, only a modest brass plaque mounted beside an old brick building. The Institute for Conservation and Material Heritage. The paint on the sign was still fresh. The key turned smoothly. The hinges creaked. I smiled. Looks like the building's older than they admitted. A voice behind me answered. That's why we hired a conservator instead of an architect. I turned. Professor Eleanor Brooks stood on the pavement holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one to me. I thought today deserved decent coffee. This from someone who always criticized my taste. I've matured. You've become expensive. She laughed. Government grants help. The Institute occupied what had once been a 19th century printing house. Instead of converting it into something fashionable, we had restored nearly everything. The original timber beams remained. The stone flooring had been repaired rather than replaced. The old iron windows still opened with effort. Imperfections carried memory. Perfection erased it. By 9 o'clock, the first group of young conservators arrived. Some had recently graduated. Others had left museums after the Ashcroft scandal. A few had traveled from overseas after reading the inquiry report. None wore expensive suits. Most carried worn notebooks. Good. Curiosity mattered more than appearance. One young woman raised her hand. Mr. Mercer? Daniel is fine. She smiled nervously. Everyone expected you to return to Ashcroft. I know. Why didn't you? I looked around the workshop. Shelves filled with pigments. Microscopes. Old canvases waiting for examination. The quiet smell of wood and linen. I already gave Ashcroft 23 years. She nodded slowly. So this is your fresh start? No. I ran a hand across an unfinished workbench. This is everyone's. Near midday, an unexpected visitor appeared. Samuel, the old janitor. Except he no longer wore the museum's navy uniform. Instead, he carried a toolbox over one shoulder. You hired me. I asked if you'd consider it. You said the building needed someone who listens. It does. He chuckled. I've been listening to old buildings longer than you've been restoring paintings. You've also saved more exhibitions than most directors. He grinned, without anyone noticing. The best work usually happens that way. He looked around the workshop. I like this place. So do I. It feels. He searched for the word. Honest. That was exactly what I wanted. The Institute operated differently from every museum I had ever known. No private executive dining room. No reserved parking. Every weekly meeting included technicians, cleaners, archivists, researchers, and students. Every restoration report remained publicly accessible. Every financial donation was published online. One afternoon, a donor frowned after reading our transparency policy. You disclose every expense? Yes. Even mistakes? Especially mistakes. He looked surprised. Isn't that risky? No. Hiding them is. He left without donating. I slept perfectly well that night. 3 months after opening, our first major project arrived. Not a famous masterpiece. Not an internationally celebrated sculpture. A small oil painting from a village church. Its market value barely covered transportation costs. Its historical value. Priceless. One student looked puzzled. I thought we'd begin with something more important. I invited everyone closer. What makes something important? The artist. The price. The publicity? I gently shook my head. This painting survived 2 wars. I pointed toward the faded surface. It stayed above one family's fireplace for 80 years. Another student leaned forward. The colors are almost gone. The memories aren't. Silence settled over the room. Then notebooks opened. No one asked about market value again. Late one evening, after everyone had gone home, I remained in the laboratory cleaning old brushes. Eleanor entered quietly. You're doing that yourself? They deserve it. So do your assistants. They'll clean tomorrow's. She leaned against the doorway. You've changed. I've slowed down. No. She smiled. You've finally stopped carrying institutions on your shoulders. I thought about that. She was right. For years I believed preserving history meant sacrificing myself. Now I understood. History survived through communities, not martyrs. Autumn arrived with crisp mornings and golden leaves gathering outside the institute. Our reputation spread quietly, not through advertisements, through work. Regional museums requested advice. Universities asked to collaborate. Former Ashcroft employees began visiting simply to observe how we operated. One afternoon, Grant arrived carrying a flat wooden crate. I have a delivery. I raised an eyebrow. I don't remember ordering anything. You didn't. She placed the crate on the examination table. The government seal remained intact. Open it. Inside lay Professor Leonard Huxley's journals. Every volume had been professionally conserved. Alongside them rested a letter. Grant handed it to me. It belongs with the journals. I unfolded the page. It bore the commissioner's signature. The National Cultural Integrity Office entrusts these journals to the Institute for Conservation and Material Heritage for Education and Research in recognition of its commitment to ethical preservation. For several moments, I said nothing. Grant finally broke the silence. You earned that. No. I carefully touched the worn leather cover. Professor Huxley did. Weeks later, Adrian visited. He looked different, healthier, less polished. He carried a portfolio beneath his arm. I wasn't sure you'd see me. I said you could visit any time. I know. He looked around the workshop where students examined pigments under microscopes. They respect you. They respect the work. He nodded. I've been teaching. Oh, community colleges. What subject? The history of professional failure. I couldn't help smiling. That sounds honest. It is. He opened his portfolio. Inside were lesson plans. Not about technique. About ethics. Documentation. Accountability. I tell them what happens when ambition grows faster than ability. And they listen. Good. He hesitated. I also tell them about you. What do you say? That the strongest conservator I ever met never tried to destroy anyone. He looked me in the eye. He simply stopped protecting people who wanted to destroy themselves. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I extended my hand. He shook it firmly, not as mentor and protege, as equals who had both survived the same collapse in different ways. Winter's first snowfall arrived quietly. The institute closed early. Students hurried home laughing. Samuel complained about icy steps while secretly enjoying every excuse to repair old handrails. Eleanor prepared tea for everyone. I remained alone in the conservation studio. On the easel rested a damaged family portrait. Unknown artist. Unknown family. Unknown value. Someone else might have called it ordinary. I saw fingerprints left by generations. Tiny repairs made with love rather than skill. History. Always history. The afternoon light softened as snow covered the courtyard. For the first time in many years, I felt no need to prove anything. No urge to defend myself. No desire to return to the museum that had once defined my life. The silence around me no longer felt empty. It felt earned. Outside, students' voices echoed faintly before fading into the snowfall. Inside, I picked up the smallest restoration brush. One careful stroke, then another. Not because anyone would applaud. Not because anyone would remember my name. But because the work deserved to survive. And now, so did I. The invitation arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. No gold embossing. No elaborate ceremony. Just a cream-colored envelope with the seal of the Ashcroft Museum. Samuel placed it on my desk. They've been trying to deliver it for 2 days. I was teaching. I told them. He smiled knowingly. They seemed surprised your schedule mattered more than theirs. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single letter. Mr. Daniel Mercer. The Ashcroft Museum respectfully invites you to attend the reopening of the Horizon Gallery as our guest of honor. Your presence would mean a great deal to the institution. No mention of titles. No promises. No requests for employment. Just an invitation. Eleanor, reading over my shoulder, asked quietly, "Will you go?" I folded the letter. I don't know. You owe them nothing. I know. But I looked toward the restoration studio where students quietly worked beneath afternoon sunlight. I don't want my last memory of that place to be betrayal. The reopening ceremony took place 2 weeks later. The museum looked different. Not because the architecture had changed, Because the atmosphere had. Gone were the oversized donor banners. The entrance hall no longer displayed portraits of board chairmen. Instead, the walls featured photographs of conservators, archivists, cleaners, researchers, volunteers. The people who had quietly kept history alive. A young receptionist smiled as I entered. "Welcome, Mr. Mercer." She wasn't pretending to recognize me. She genuinely did. "I've read your restoration journals." I blinked. They're required reading for interns now. For a brief moment, I didn't know what to say. The acting museum director met me inside the central hall. Dr. Amelia Rhodes, an archaeologist by training. Quiet, direct, entirely unlike Victor. "Thank you for coming. You've changed the place." "We're trying." She led me through galleries I once knew better than my own apartment. Nothing felt unfamiliar, yet everything felt lighter. Glass panels beside every artwork now listed complete conservation histories. Not just artists, not just dates. Every conservator's contribution, every restoration, every major repair. History had finally begun acknowledging those who protected it. When we reached the dawn beyond winter, I stopped walking. The painting looked exactly as I remembered, but the plaque beneath it had changed. Artist, Elias Morrow. Chief Restoration Conservator, Daniel Mercer. Supporting Conservation Team. A complete list of every technician, researcher, photographer, and assistant involved in the 12-year restoration. Every name. Not only mine. Every name. I smiled. "Better." Amelia nodded. "History is collaborative." It always was. We simply forgot. A crowd gradually gathered around us. Former colleagues. Young conservators. Students. Journalists. None shouted questions. None searched for scandal. One student raised a hand nervously. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yes." "Were you angry?" The room became quiet. Everyone waited. I considered the question carefully. I was. And now, I understand something I didn't understand then. "What?" I looked at the painting. "Anger can protect your dignity." A pause. "But it cannot become your home." The student slowly wrote those words into her notebook. Near the end of the ceremony, Amelia stepped onto the small stage. "Before we conclude," she looked toward me, "there is one final matter." An assistant wheeled out a wooden display case. Inside rested my old white conservation gloves, the same pair I had folded beside my access badge on the day I walked away. I stared at them silently. "We found them preserved in the investigation archives." Amelia smiled gently. "They've become part of the museum's history." A small plaque beneath them read, "The gloves worn by Chief Conservator Daniel Mercer on the day independent preservation records protected the Horizon collection." Not a symbol of revenge. A symbol of responsibility. I hadn't expected that. Perhaps because I had never imagined history would one day preserve a fragment of my own. As the guests slowly dispersed, I wandered alone through the museum one final time. No reporters followed. No officials interrupted. Only quiet footsteps echoed across polished stone. I paused outside the old conservation studio. The work tables had been replaced. The microscopes upgraded. Fresh brushes rested in carefully labeled drawers. On one wall hung a framed sentence. Not from a famous philosopher. Not from a politician. From Professor Leonard Huxley's recovered journal. "A conservator does not save paintings. He saves tomorrow's chance to understand yesterday." I smiled. He would have liked this room. Outside the building, evening sunlight stretched across the museum steps. Someone was waiting. Victor Hale. Older. Thinner. His suit no longer carried the effortless confidence it once had. He held no lawyers. No assistants. No authority. Only a walking cane. "I wasn't sure you'd stop." "I almost didn't." He nodded. "I deserve that." For several moments, neither of us spoke. The city carried on around us. Cars passed. Children laughed somewhere across the square. Life had moved forward. Eventually, Victor broke the silence. "I came to apologize." I looked at him quietly. "I spent years thinking the museum belonged to me." His voice was steady. "I thought preserving my position meant preserving the institution." He laughed softly. "I never realized I'd begun destroying both." He reached into his coat pocket. A small brass object rested in his palm. The chairman's master key. "I no longer have any use for this." He placed it gently on the stone railing. "I don't expect forgiveness. No. I only wanted you to know." His eyes drifted toward the museum entrance. "You were the best conservator we ever had." There was no defense left in his voice. No manipulation. Only regret. The kind that arrived too late to change anything. I looked at the key. then pushed it gently back toward him. You should give that to the museum. He frowned. Not me. It was never mine. A long silence followed. Then Victor nodded. I understand. For the first time, I believed he truly did. Months later, spring returned. The institute welcomed another class of students. The waiting list had grown longer than we could accommodate. Museums from across the country shared restoration data freely through the transparency program we had developed. The profession itself had begun changing. Slowly, patiently, as meaningful change always did. One afternoon, a student asked while cleaning an old landscape, Professor Mercer? Yes, if you had the chance. She hesitated. Would you go back and stop everything before it happened? I looked at the painting beneath my hands, then out through the workshop window where sunlight warmed the courtyard. No. She looked surprised. Why not? Because then the truth would still be hidden. I gently adjusted the microscope. And history deserves the truth. She smiled. So do people. Yes. So do people. The room settled into comfortable silence. Brushes moved. Pages turned. Light filtered softly through old glass windows. No applause. No headlines. No enemies left to defeat. Only careful hands preserving fragments of the past for those who had not yet arrived. I dipped my brush into fresh conservation medium and began another patient stroke. Some masterpieces hung in museums. Others were built quietly, one honest decision at a time. And this one, at last, was my own.